This is chapter 7 and possibly chapter 8 today as we continue our study in the book of Genesis. And actually what I want to do is we'll start, and when we do our read through, we'll actually start at a portion of chapter 6, because what we're really talking about today is Noah, the story of Noah and the flood. And it kind of all goes together. Matter of fact, it doesn't stop after Genesis chapter 8. It keeps going for a few more chapters. But I think it's interesting that, we often refer to Abraham as Father Abraham. And you don't often hear people say Father Noah, but really Noah is the father of all of us that are currently on the earth, right? So all of the humans that were born after Adam and Eve were wiped out in the flood, and it was this righteous remnant that God protected, Noah and his family, that procreated the rest of the world as we know it today. Matter of fact, let's see if I can if I can do a good job sharing this with you. We'll be talking more about this soon, but I wanted to share this screen with you. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen that shows a map. Somebody go ahead and unmute to confirm.
Yes.
Okay, so this is an interesting map, and what it shows is how the descendants of Noah's family, Noah's boys, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, spread out over the world. So the descendants of Shem are shown in this magenta color, and the descendants of Ham are shown in this orangish color, and then the descendants of Japheth are shown here in this greenish color. And you can see the descendants of Shem spread out here in Persia and Saudi Arabia and around the Persian Gulf, and Egypt. Ham's descendants settled in Egypt and Ethiopia. Japheth's descendants settled in what we know as the Black Sea and in much of Europe. So it's interesting to see how from Noah, then Shem, Ham, and Japheth, how the earth was populated and how the families spread out. Some interesting names in the descendants of Ham. You'll see Nimrod right here. Nimrod being the early king, sort of the grandfather of the Babylonians. Nimrod is referred to in Genesis. We'll read about him as a mighty hunter, but what that is actually in reference to is he was known for making a life without God, or trying to make a life without God. You see this Ashkenaz here? So there are, in Jewish families tracing their heritage, there's two big groups. One are called Ashkenazi Jews, and those are the ones that come from Europe. And the other is the Sephardic Jews, and those are the ones from the Middle East. And it's just interesting to see Ashkenaz, right? So if you're Ashkenazi Jew means that your family has come from Europe. The land of Cush, which is modern-day Ethiopia, and then Egypt, Mizraim. It's just, like I said, it's interesting to see how people spread out. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and let's get to our read-through. So today we're going to start in Genesis chapter 7. Well, actually, that's not true. Turn to Genesis chapter 6, and we're going to head to verse 11. Genesis chapter 6, verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood or gopher wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark and make it lower, middle, and upper decks. I am going to bring flood waters to the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has the breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wives and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird and every kind of animal and every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it as food for you and for them. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Now over to chapter 7. The Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds of life throughout the earth. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds, and of all the creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. And after the 7 days, the flood waters came on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 7th day of the 2nd month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. They had with them every wild animal according to its kind, all the livestock according to their kinds, every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, and everything with wings. Pairs of all creatures that have breath and life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. The animals going in were male and female of every living thing, as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut him in. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The water rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. Every living thing that moves on land perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, and all creatures that swarm over the earth, and mankind, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and creatures that move along the ground, and the birds were wiped out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. All right, that is Genesis chapter 7. So there's a lot of interesting features, a lot of interesting thoughts in this chapter. And of course, we're going to hopefully roll right into chapter 8 and continue with the progression of the flood. But some of the things that I would like to point out as we unpack this story. So let's go back up to verse 1. The Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation." So mankind had become so evil that he thought of nothing but evil all the time. And yet God finds within Noah a righteous man. And one thing that is a continuing theme throughout the Bible is that God always protects a righteous remnant. That's carried through all the way, even to Revelation and what we read about the future coming tribulation period. God always protects a righteous remnant. Now, I think it's important to note that many, all human beings but 8 perished. So it isn't the case that God saves everyone, but he always protects a righteous remnant. Now, how is it that Noah is righteous? How is it that God sees, just as it says here, because I have found you righteous in this generation? How is it that God finds Noah righteous? Well, the answer to that is by faith in God. By faith in God. And what I want to do is let's take a look at Genesis chapter 15. So just a few pages forward, Genesis chapter 15. And we're going to take a look at chapter 15, verse 6. So likewise, just as God saw or found Noah righteous, Abraham, God also found righteous. And so how could this be? This is obviously before the time of Christ. It's always been faith that has saved you. Faith in who, or faith in what? And the answer is faith in God. It's always been through faith. It's consistent through the entire biblical narrative that what makes a person righteous is their belief, their faith in God. And if we take a look at Genesis chapter 15, and we talk about Abraham. Verse 6 reads, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. In the same way, Noah believed in the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So it's always righteousness that has saved us. Now turn to the New Testament, to the book of Hebrews. Book of Hebrews. Sometimes a little difficult to find, but if you go to Revelation, you've gone too far. It's not far from the book of Revelation. So turn to Hebrews and to chapter 11. And chapter 11 is often referred to as the Faith Hall of Fame. And we're going to read just a little portion of that this morning. So Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to take a look at verses 7 and 8. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Verse 9, by faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. So by faith is how we are found righteous, our belief in God. George, please mute.
Oops, sorry.
So point being is that back to Genesis chapter 7, how is it that God found Noah righteous? It's because of Noah's faith. All right, back to verse 1. The Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate. And also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth." All right, so an interesting point here. I thought it was, the animals came to the ark 2 by 2. So what's this about 7? So it is the case that the animals came to the ark 2 by 2, and further revelation being provided in Genesis chapter 7 says that of all the clean animals, Noah was to take 7, and 7 pairs. And we'll see why that is here in a little bit in chapter 8. But it's interesting that, yes, conceptually in our minds, we think of all the animals in the ark, entering 2 by 2. And that did happen. But then for the clean animals, God actually told Abraham to take 7 pairs of the clean animals. What's a clean animal versus a unclean animal? So scavengers are considered unclean animals. So anything that scavenges is unclean. In the oceans, a bottom feeder is a scavenger and is considered unclean. So not all animals are considered clean animals if they are carrion or if they feed on carrion, meaning roadkill. They are unclean. And if they eat seeds and plants, then they are considered clean. Tom, you have a question?
Does this mean the dietary laws were enforced at that
Well,
time?
that's an interesting question, because it implies some teaching that we don't have the advantage of seeing here in Genesis, right? So there had to be some instruction to Noah that what was considered clean and unclean. So a form of the dietary laws are here. This brings up an interesting question, and I have an Orthodox Jewish friend that I work with, and he and I we have some interesting conversations, and there is much he can't tell me, which is kind of like this what would you say, unspoken thing in Judaism that goy, you're not to put pearls before swine. And if you're a Gentile, they aren't to share everything with you. There are some things that they hold back. So he couldn't say a lot, but he implied that that when we were talking about the law and how at this time the law had not been given to Moses, so there was no Torah at this point. So man had become evil and sinful, but God had not provided the ruler of the definition of what sin is. And he disagreed with that statement and said, no, Noah and his family, they were told that that it was wrong to murder. And that actually comes later when we're looking at Genesis chapter 9. It doesn't come at this point right here. Torah does not exist. The law has not been in place. The ruler that defines what is sin had not been given to man through Moses. So what kind of dietary laws were there? Probably guidance, probably instruction. But like I was saying, Tom, there is some teaching of Noah here that is implied that we don't see directly. All right, verse 4. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature that I have made. So it's important to see that in verse 2, he says, verse 1, the Lord then said to Noah, go into the ark, you and your whole family, and all the animals, okay? And then here, they're supposed to go in. 7 days from now, God says that he will bring the rains. that he will bring the floods. I think it's important to remember that at this point, it had never rained on the earth. They had never experienced rain. It hadn't yet experienced rain, but they were going to get a bunch of it. And we'll see that here in a little bit of how God actually caused the flood, and rain was only one part of it. So again, verse 4, 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So God is telling Noah how long it's going to rain. And just think about it. When we have good rains here, and if it rains for a solid hour, you have flooding in the streets. Just imagine the amount of water there was after 40 days and 40 nights of constant rain. And then God says, I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. Verse 5. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Now, you'll recall we just read a portion of chapter 6, and at the bottom of chapter 6, the last verse, it says, and Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. So this is the second time that we read this, and this is part of Noah's faithfulness. Notice Noah did not question God. Well, God, why are you doing this? I don't understand, God, why you would wipe out all humans except for me and my family. I don't understand why you would wipe out all the animals on the earth, all the animals on dry ground. Why are you doing that? No, Noah, by his faith, was obedient to what God was directing him to do. Again, verse 5, and Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. And it isn't the case that Noah was selective and he made a decision. Well, that's a good instruction, but that one, not so much. So I'm going to do this, and if I have time, I'll get around to that. No, Noah did all that God had commanded him to do. Verse 6, now, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth. 600 years old. I was thinking about this morning as I was getting ready for my day, and how long our antediluvial, or that means pre-flood, ancestors lived. And it's closer to what God had originally intended for mankind. So when God created Adam and Eve, and before the fall, before sin entered the world, at a minimum, God intended man to live a long time. I don't know if God intended man to live forever, that Adam and Eve, if sin hadn't entered the world, would have lived forever. Maybe. We don't know. But it seems like Adam and Eve, if sin hadn't entered the world, if death hadn't become a reality, would have lived to around 1,000, minimum. Here, Noah is 600 years old when the floodwaters came upon the earth. Verse 7, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Now, this brings up an interesting question. We find references in the Bible of the faith of the father saves the rest of their family. And although we believe in individual salvation and that everyone is individually responsible for their relationship with God and being right with God, there is some indication that the faithfulness of the parents carries over to the children. And here, God has found Noah righteous, and it saves his family. So I don't know that you can make a definitive doctrine on this, but it's an interesting question. It's something to think about. And I think it's also something to pray about, because, if you're like any of us, as much as we try to teach our children the ways of the Lord, some choose to follow and some not. But one of the things that if you're a parent, that never ends until you're no longer breathing oxygen, what doesn't change is your ability to pray for your children and to remain faithful to God. And it does add a level of responsibility to us as men and as fathers. Verse 8, pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds, and of all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark, as God had commanded Noah. This is important to notice. Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth didn't go and wrangle the animals. They didn't go and gather them and corral them up and then get them all inside the ark. No, God brought the animals to them. And it speaks to the supernatural level of events that are going on here with the flood. God brought the animals to Noah. He didn't have to go and corral them. Verse 10, and after 7 days the floodwaters came on the earth. So again, God told Noah that it was time to enter the ark. The 120 years that he spent telling everybody, warning everybody that the floods were coming, the judgment from God was coming, and built the ark. 120 years building the ark. The time had come for Noah and his family and all the animals to enter. And we'll see here in a bit that it was God who sealed the door. It was God who closed the door and them inside. And they were in the ark for 7 days before it began to rain. I thought about that a little bit. And I think about the conversations that my wife and I would have, right? If we were Noah and Noah's wife. And I know my wife would say, so, you said that God said it's going to start raining. When's that going to happen? Well, we've been in here 5 days now and nothing's happened. Are you sure? Are you sure? And Noah would have responded to her, yes, honey, believe me, I'm sure. Because the rains didn't come until 7 days after God closed them inside the ark. Verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 7th day of the 2nd month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven were open, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So there's some interesting detail here. As I said before this time, it had never rained. People had never experienced rain. So then how was the vegetation watered? So waters and steam would rise up from the earth, from cisterns and natural cisterns inside the earth, and they would water everything. They would irrigate everything. And as I said previously, I believe that that when God created the heavens around the earth, that he made a moisture barrier in the upper atmosphere. And the purpose of this moisture barrier was to be an ultraviolet filter to protect the human beings on the earth from the harmful rays of ultraviolet rays of the sun. And it's the UV rays from the sun that are the primary agent that ages us. And that is why people lived 600, 700, 900 years pre-flood. What God did to create the rains is he allowed that moisture barrier in the upper atmosphere to collapse, eliminating that ultraviolet filter in the process. But enough moisture was in the upper atmosphere that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And then the water rising up like steam out of the natural cisterns below the ground on the earth came up also. So the water was coming down from above and it was coming up from below. Verse 13. On that very day, Noah and his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. So that's 7 days prior to the rain. They had with them every wild animal according to its kind, all livestock according to their kind, every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, everything with wings. Pairs of all creatures that have the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. The animals going in were male and female of every living kind, as God had commanded Noah. Then this is the important point of this paragraph. Then the Lord shut him in. Shut who in? Noah and his family. Shut him in. So Noah didn't have to figure out how to close the door. God took care of that. Why did God take care of it? Because he wanted to make sure that it was properly sealed. Again, he was protecting a righteous remnant. God was active in this situation. God wasn't just waving his hand and making it all happen. He was actively protecting Noah inside the ark. Verse 17, for 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The water rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. It worked. It actually worked. The ark, the way that God told Noah to build the ark, it worked. It floated. This great big barge, wooden barge, multi-level, multi-decked barge, full of Noah's family and the animals. It worked. It floated. It actually floated. A football field and a half long. This was a big boat, and it worked. And the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. So all the high mountains were covered with water. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. So I didn't do the math, but if a cubit was 18 inches, right? So a cubit was from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your middle finger, right? So if a cubit was 18 inches, 18 times 15 would be more than 20 feet. More than 20 feet of the highest mountains on the earth. That's how deep the waters were. That's some deep water. Verse 21. Every living thing that moved on the land perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, and all creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind, everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and creatures that move along the ground, and birds were wiped out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. And the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Now, you know, the rain's coming for 40 days and 40 nights. That's a familiar number, right? 40 in the Bible is the number of testing. When Jesus went out to the desert after his baptism, he was there for 40 days. It's the number of testing. But have you ever thought of how long was it that Noah and his family was in the ark with all of those animals and having to feed them and having enough food to feed them? Well, it says right here in verse 24, the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. 150 days. That's how long the waters flooded the earth. They were still in the ark after 150 days. They got into the ark. God commanded them to enter the ark 7 days before it began to rain. It rained for 40 days, 40 nights. And then the flood waters existed for 150 days. All right, let's turn to chapter 8 and let's do our read through. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and all the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of heaven had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth, At the end of 150 days, the water had gone down. On the 7th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. After 40 days, Noah opened a window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the waters had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw the surface of the ground was dry. By the 22nd month, the earth was completely dry. Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives, and bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so that they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it." So Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds, everything that moves on land came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seedtime and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease." And that is the end of chapter 8. All right, so let's go back to the top and let's start to unpack. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. I think that's huge, because God could have said, "All right, my job is done here," you know, and off he went, and he could have forgotten all about Noah and his family and all the animals that were on the ark, but he didn't do that. God remembered Noah. Noah was on God's heart and on God's mind. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. So the waters, there was so much water that the ground couldn't absorb all of it. So God caused evaporation to clear out the rest of the waters. Verse 2, "Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed, and the rain stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the water had gone down." So that's the reference that we saw at the end of chapter 7. After 150 days, the waters had gone down. On the 7th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. The 7th day of the 7th month. They have been in this ark 7 months and 7 days so far. and the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And we know today, we know that the mountains of Ararat are in Turkey. And we think that that's where the ark came to rest. And there is some evidence from time to time. You'll see pictures from an aircraft, military aircraft that was overflying the area in Turkey. And you'll see pictures of an outline of what might have been the ark. And some people are, like Bob Cornuke, convinced that they've actually seen or been to where the ark actually resides. Those kinds of things are interesting because do we need to know if the ark actually existed? Do we need to find the archaeological proof of the ark to believe in God? No, because that's not faith. I mean, yes, it's encouraging to be able to find the archaeological remnants of things like the ark, but that is not the basis of our faith. The basis of our faith is our belief in God and our belief in Jesus Christ. Verse 5, the waters continued to recede until the 10th month. So now they've been on there 10 months. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. That's how much water there was, is that after 10 months and 10 days, now the tops of the mountains were visible, and they look like islands. They look like islands poking up from under the waters. Verse 6, after 40 days, Noah opened a window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. It's important to see the raven doesn't return, and we'll get to that in a minute. Verse 8, then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find nowhere to perch because there was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and he took the dove and he brought it back to himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf, which I think is interesting. It's interesting because you get an olive leaf on an olive tree. So there had to be enough time of dry ground that an olive tree, I don't know how high or how big, but at some size, an olive tree had grown. And the dove had plucked some of a leaf from an olive tree and brought it back to Noah. Now notice he came back to Noah. And isn't it interesting that the universal symbol of peace to this day is a dove and an olive branch? And the reason that is when the dove returned with the olive leaf in its beak, it signified that God's judgment was done, that God's judgment was complete. And yes, to this day, the universal symbol of peace is a dove with an olive branch in its beak. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him. So what's going on here between this raven and this dove? So the raven symbolizes the non-believers, because the raven left and he didn't return because what he found was carrion. Ravens are scavengers, and they eat meat from dead creatures, which is what carrion is. So the waters had receded enough that this raven had a real feast, and he liked it, and he didn't see any reason to return. Ravens are symbolic of the world and those that don't believe in God, whereas the dove symbolize the believers, those that have faith in God, those who believe in God. And while there were still waters about, what did the dove do? Return to the safety of the ark. The dove was reliant on the salvation that God afforded Noah and his family until the waters were gone, the judgment was done, and then the dove did not return after on the third try, after bringing the olive branch in its mouth, symbolizing peace and the end of God's judgment. It's kind of an interesting image. Turn with me to let's go to John, and we're headed to chapter 6. John chapter 3. John chapter 3 and verse 6. John chapter 3, verse 6. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at my saying, you must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from and where it is going. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. And the dove symbolized those who were born of the Spirit. And now let's turn to the book of 1 John. So we're in John, but we're going to go to 1 John towards the end of the New Testament. 1 John. And we're headed to chapter 2. First, second, third John are oftentimes difficult to find because they all kind of like stick together there. Very short letters from the Apostle John. So we're headed to 1 John chapter 2. And we're looking at verse 15. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. And if we were to say the same words differently, but whoever does the will of God receives eternal life. What is the will of God? That you will become one of his adopted sons or daughters. All right. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 8. And let's continue. Verse 13. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. Do you know what this means? If you did the math, you would see that Noah and his family and all the animals were in the ark a total of 371 days. 371 days. If you are fortunate enough to have an RV, whether it's a fifth-wheel trailer or a Winnebago of some kind, could you imagine spending 371 days in it with family and not being able to leave, not being able to exit? And here's this ark, and it's full of animals, and Noah's family, and they were in it for 371 days before God said that they could exit. Verse 15, then God said to Noah, come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so that they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase on it. So God is blessing them, and he's telling them, go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. Because God wants the earth to be full again. God's judgment is over. And God says, he will never do this again. He will never again wipe out all of humanity in the same way. So Noah, verse 18, so Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives and all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds. Everything that moves on land came out of the ark, one kind after another. Now notice, this is important, notice the first thing that Noah does after he exits the ark. Verse 20, then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. And this is why God told him to take 7 pairs of all the clean animals and all the clean birds, so that they could be used in a sacrifice to God. And this sacrifice symbolized Noah's appreciation for what God had done for he and his family and all the animals. He had saved them. He saved them. And this sacrifice looks forward to the future ultimate sacrifice that Jesus Christ made on the cross for us. So notice that Noah, the first thing he did when he got off the ark is he stopped. He didn't go explore. He didn't see what fruit he could find. He didn't look to see what was left of the cities that used to exist. That wasn't the first thing that he did. The first thing that he did is he built an altar to God, and he brought to him sacrifice. He thanked God for saving them. He thanked God for having mercy upon them. He thanked God for the instructions that God had given Noah on how to build the ark, the 3-decked, the 3-tiered vessel that saved he and his family and all the animals on the earth. Verse 21, the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. This is the biblical basis. The difference between the liberal view and the conservative view when it comes to evil in the world. The liberal view is that everyone is created good and we learn to be bad. The biblical view is everyone is born evil. And we have to make a course change in direction to become good. It says right here, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And if you've been a parent, you know you didn't have to teach your child to be selfish. You didn't have to teach your child to get angry. You didn't have to teach your child to have their own will and want to be independent. Those things are innate. They are born that way. Perry's model is that all of us are born with a dead battery and a light bulb. I haven't shared this with you in a while, but I believe that everybody is born with a dead battery on a light bulb. And there isn't enough electricity in the battery to light the light bulb. And then several times in our lifetime, the Holy Spirit comes by and imparts enough energy into that battery to make the light bulb flash. And some people see that light bulb flicker. They see that light bulb come on and they go, "Oh, what was that? I want more of that. Lord, can you show me that you're real?" And other people, the Holy Spirit comes by and puts enough charge in that battery to make the light bulb flash, and they go, "Oh, what was that?" And then they move on with their life because they're consumed with the world. There are other things that are important to them. And even though their light bulb might flash several times and they say, that's interesting, it isn't enough to cause them to change the direction of their lives. But the Holy Spirit comes by and puts enough electricity, enough charge in everyone's battery to see that light bulb flash at least several times in our lives. But it's what you do with that light that makes the difference. Verse 21, the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart. I think that's interesting because figuratively, when the sacrifice is done, the flesh is put on the altar and it's burned, it creates a smoke that rises up to heavens, and the idea is that it reaches God's nostrils. And that God, here it says in verse 21, the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination in his heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. Never again. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. God created the cycles that we experience on the earth. What are some of those cycles? Seed time. If you plant, you will reap. That's a cycle. If you don't plant, there's nothing to reap. Seed time and harvest. Cold and heat. Summer goes into winter. Day eventually becomes night. And those cycles will never cease. As long as the earth endures. I think it's important to see here that God doesn't say that it will continue in perpetuity, that it will continue in eternity. No, he says, as long as the earth endures, these things will happen. These cycles will exist. As long as the earth endures. Who is it that is going to burn over the earth and the heavens? It's God. And the earth as we know it will be fundamentally changed after the point that sin is eradicated from humankind, after the great white throne judgment, after we stand before the Maker. And all of us are judged on whether or not we have received Christ as our Savior. Do we have faith in God? And after that moment, the earth is burned over, the heavens are burned over, and then we step into eternity. And God's plan for humankind is done. His judgment is over. And we receive the dove with the olive branch. Closing thoughts, comments?
Well, the Lord certainly did quite a few things and made a lot of things happen in this whole verse and extended over this period of time. It's amazing what he did to give Noah faith and to redirect the creatures of the world and everything else. So I guess we're blessed that all this happened. And,
yes. I mean, John, you're right, because, thank God, literally, for the righteousness of Noah, because none of us would be here today if God did not find Noah to be righteous.
If you've ever had animals, and need to clean out the stalls, I mean, 371 days in there, somebody have to be doing some cleaning.
It'd be pretty stinky. Yeah.
Well, you get pretty high too. I mean, pretty messy.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine that there was no room for anything after 371 days inside the ark. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just think of how many people there were to do the cleanup and how many animals there were.
Yeah.
I know. 8 people to do the cleanup. And like I said at the start of our study, we often hear the reference to Abraham as Father Abraham, but really we should be saying Father Noah. That all of us that exist today can trace our humanity, our lineage, our heritage, all the way back to Noah. All right, gentlemen, please have a good rest of your week and go with God.
You too.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, Barry.